This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Get the Angel Reese special at McDonald's now. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. Sound good? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time.
I was like, wait a minute. How was I the top student all from kindergarten through 12th grade? I went to a really great university on a full ride, got my master's degree, accomplished all these things, right? But I have never once understood these basic concepts around banking, budgeting, interest rates, comparing loans. It was like I was deprived from learning this, and I got like angry.
Welcome to How To. I'm Carvell Wallace. Right now, in the U.S., more than 42 million people have federal student loan debt. And that's not even surprising, right? Because unless you're ultra wealthy or you have somehow gotten a full ride to college, higher education isn't really affordable. And yet, kids are still taught that it's basically mandatory. So if it's not affordable, but it's mandatory, that's why you have student loans, right? So that's 42 million people, most of them still in their teens, who are making these huge, ginormous financial decisions. And it's fair to say that most of us at that age are not aware of the full ramifications of this. We leave our future selves holding the bag, struggling to pay the proverbial piper, wishing we could somehow be debt-free. And that's exactly where we find this week's listener.
My name is Valerie, and I am wanting to pay back my student loans in a very effective way. I'm going to be 40 in 3 years, and I'm just like, I do not want to be in debt.
Valerie is now working at a museum in New York, but if we wound back the clock, we'd meet a teenage Valerie dreaming of working in fashion, looking for a way to pay for her degree.
When I went to college, my siblings and I were all in school at the same time, and so my parents paid for a portion. They were able to do that. And then whatever they couldn't pay for, there was like a portion covered by this tuition assistance grant. And then the rest was just student loans.
Valerie ended up with an initial federal loan of about $25,000. Now, for context, the average student loan debt, public and private combined, is around $41,000. So Valerie's amount may not seem like a lot compared to the eye-popping amounts you see in the news or even compared to the average American. But those monthly payments can still have a real stranglehold, especially when you're starting out and you don't really know what you're doing.
I got my loan paperwork. It came in the mail. My dad was like, this is for you, like.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I was like, okay, cool. So I honestly don't even really remember reading the terms of the repayment agreement. Or if I read them, I guess it felt so distant that I was kind of like, sure, I'll pay this off, like whatever. Signed it, moved to New York. And this is an expensive city to live in. I didn't get a job in fashion. I worked retail. I've worked retail for most of my career. And being in my 20s, living in this big city, my attention wasn't always on paying it back. My student loan payments at the time were maybe around $200 a month. I never paid attention to the interest. I never paid attention to how much was going towards the principal. And so I think at the time I was like, this is too much and I don't want to pay this back.
Right.
I went from being consistent with my payments to deciding to just not pay them at all. And then my taxes were garnished. I filed taxes and I got this letter. I was like, yeah, I'm getting a tax return. And it was like a letter like, actually, no.
You thought.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you get $0 because you didn't actually pay your loans. And so from there, I was like, oh, crap, I should take this more seriously.
Over the next few years, Valerie was more diligent with her payments. Of course, she wasn't thrilled about forking over that much money a month, but still, she stayed on top of it. That is, until she lost her job. Pretty soon, she couldn't keep up with the payments, and her loans went into default.
this person I spoke to was like, oh, well, can you pay like $5 a month? And so I was like, sure. Paid that for a certain amount of time, ended up getting a new job, but I didn't have any money saved. And so I think I just continued to pay like $5 or something until I was in my late 20s, and I actually started to pay more attention to my loans and like how the money was being sort of portioned off. That has put me in a mental spiral since.
Now, Valerie's in her late 30s, and at this point, she just wants to get the loan off her back. She's got a steady job, and she just got a raise. So she figures now she can maybe pay down her loans without compromising too much of her lifestyle.
The idea I had in mind was that I would just be like dumping money towards my loans, but not save any. And then I would be able to pay off my loans quicker. So then once I paid them off quicker, I could then go back and rebuild my savings. So if I wanted to pay the loan off in a year, I would need to pay at least $1,000 a month. I was like, that's way too much.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
I need to eat.
Like I was delusional. Since then I've been like, okay, well, I can do about $500 a month. But if I do $500 a month, then it would take me 29 months to pay the loan off. I know that 29 months it's a little over 2 years. It's not a lot of time, but every time I make a payment and I see a portion of it going to the interest, I'm just like, ugh, like this money, you know.
Right. And it's so much
it's more. And I'm like, is this a joke?
So you may be wondering, what's the rush? Why not just pay off the base amount each month and let it be? Well, besides feeling sick at how much interest she's being charged, Valerie also needs to make sure that she is set for the future and can take care of her family.
So my father passed away about 11 years ago, and we grew up in the house that he grew up in, so it's been in our family for many years. My mom doesn't want to live there, and so each time we talk about this, I think about how much money I actually have saved. And I'm like, if my mom had some medical emergency, or like if I need to hire a lawyer tomorrow, I couldn't. If I needed to take on the responsibility of managing the house, like I don't know that I could. And I know that my siblings aren't really set up to do so either. The student loans feel like such a huge, not burden, but it feels like this final obstacle that I need to kind of overcome so that I can focus on this other part of my life.
Valerie's story is familiar to me, and it might be familiar to you too. I also went to school for a creative field and signed on to a ton of debt at just 17 years old. And when I got out, I just kind of like ignored it. Like it took pretty much all the money I had just to keep a roof over my head and my lights on in my 20s. My loans went into default, and it took me years, decades even, to get things back in order. It's a pretty common story, and it's probably not an accident that so many young people find themselves in this situation, which makes it all the more important that we hear from someone who can help us understand all of it.
So my name is Yanely Espinal. I am a financial educator. I work as the Director of Educational Outreach at ngpf.org. I'm an author. I have a book called Mind Your Money, and I'm also a podcast host for Marketplace called Financially Inclined.
Yanely teaches others how to wade through the intentionally complicated world of money. And she does it in a refreshingly honest way because she's been in Valerie's shoes. She's going to tell us that story, and she's going to help Valerie and maybe you when we get back. Stay with us. This episode is brought to you by Defender. For those who embrace the impossible, the Defender 110 is ready for the adventure. This legendary vehicle has been reimagined with modern design for a new generation of explorers. With a striking exterior that boasts compelling proportions and precise detailing, the Defender 110 masterfully combines style with capability. The Defender is built with a durable, lightweight monocoque architecture to provide extra strength for your next great adventure. And its tough, rigid body design exudes confidence so that when you're behind the wheel, you will too. Engineered to meet challenges head-on and tested to the extreme, the Defender empowers you to explore with confidence and embrace the impossible, whether you're off-road or on. You're ready for a wide range of adventures? The Defender family also features the two-door Defender 90, the Defender 110, and the Defender 130, which seats up to 8. A vehicle made to go further. The Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, you think about a great product or a cool brand or maybe some brilliant marketing. But the often overlooked secret is actually the business behind the business, making selling simple. And for millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not so secret is that Shopify with Shop Pay can boost conversions by up to 50%, meaning there's way less carts going abandoned and way more sales. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/howto. Go to shopify.com/howto to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/howto.
We're so done with new year, new you. This year, it's more you on Bumble. More of you shamelessly sending playlists, especially that one filled with show tunes. More of you finding Geminis because you know you always like them. More of you dating with intention because you know what you want. And you know what? We love that for you. Someone else will too. Be more you this year and find them on Bumble.
Unlike our listener Valerie, Yanely Espinal's history with debt didn't begin with student loans, but it did begin in college.
I was one of those lucky kids who did get a full scholarship to go to college, but that covered tuition, room and board. And so when I got there, being a low-income kid, like my parents are both immigrants that never went to school, they didn't even go beyond like the 3rd or 4th grade, so let alone college. They couldn't really help me with the process. And so I took on some credit cards and I just started to pay for my textbooks and my laptop and lab fees. And then, of course, some clothes and shoes and spring break trips went on the cards. And I just didn't understand debt. I didn't know the interest rates on these cards. I had multiple credit cards. And then my junior year, I really, really wanted to go study abroad, but that was not included in my scholarship. So I took on a student loan. And so when I graduated, I had $7,500 student loan directly to the university, plus over $20,000 of credit card debt from the 4 years of swiping that thing like it was nobody's business.
How did you go about dealing with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, at first, I didn't. I just was like doing the bare minimum. Like, I'm going to pay my cell phone bill, my rent, I'm buying my groceries. I'm going to give mom and dad $50 here or there when I can and all the things. And then I would look at my credit card bills and just put the minimum monthly payment due to each card. But the debt just kept getting bigger and bigger on each of the cards separately. And it was like one day where I finally sat down and I put all the debts in one place. And that was so scary. You know, it's $2,000 over here, $3,000 over there, $1,500 over here. They seem small when they're on separate cards. But when you put all of it together and you look at that total cumulative amount, like, you know, my heart skipped a beat. I was like, wait a minute, how is this over $20K? And at that time, I was a teacher, so I was being paid about $40,000 a year before taxes. And I was living in New York City. So it was a lot. But I started reading because I'm a nerdy kid. I don't know about you guys remember this, but like I grew up in a home where like we didn't have all of them because we didn't have the money, but we had some encyclopedias around.
The encyclopedia, right. When you ask a question, just go look it up.
We didn't have the K, we didn't have the W, but we had some, certain letters. So I always remember like I would go look it up. And so I just started thinking about like, how can I teach myself as much as I can to try to fix this? So I came across all the classic money books, the Susie Orman, David Botts, like all these books. I almost had like a vengeance. Like they didn't want me to learn it. Now I'm going to teach it to myself and I'm going to get it anyway. Like that was my entire vibe.
Yeah, I love that. And you're also going to share that with other people.
Right. I'm going to put everybody on because that's the thing too. Like if I, with all that privilege and opportunity and access that I had, and I didn't figure this out and I didn't get taught this, then I know that all of my friends back home and all of my cousins and, everybody back in the hood, they definitely are not getting this because I didn't get it. So to me, it definitely was like a call to action that I can't keep it to myself. I had to go back and like spread it to everybody and really just empower them and like put fire under them, because otherwise we're all going to end up repeating these generational cycles of poverty.
One of the pieces of advice Yanely came across in these classic books is to ensure that you're keeping your big three spending buckets under control. So that means housing, transportation, and food. You're supposed to be as frugal as possible on those big three in order to put as much money as possible toward your loan to pay it off ASAP. But that scorched earth mentality is not exactly easy.
This is one of the hardest things you will ever do psychologically in your life. Like, we're talking about a lot of money, and we're talking about the consistency of making a payment every single month religiously, like without fail, which is something that we as humans are not good at doing. We're just not good at it. And so I do think that's the first thing. It's just the mindset. Like, if you can get your mind right, get the brain right for this, and you're like fixed on it, tunnel vision, like nothing's going to get in my way, then, that's half the battle. And then the other thing is, of course, is like the budget piece. Like, are you doing everything in two areas? One is to cut back and minimize as much as you can in terms of like unnecessary spending and like cutting corners here and there. Like, okay, where can I, squeeze another $10-20? Like, can I lower my plan? Can I talk to the phone company and get this different plan? Can I sign up for something that's cheaper? Can I cut this subscription? All those things. But the more important one is the second one, which is, are you increasing your income, whether that's through creative work outside of your job or whether that's through really becoming so skilled in the work that you're doing that you're promoted within the workplace or within the industry that you're in. But of course, you got to be realistic in terms of how much time you have to dedicate to working. And you also want to have a little bit of a semblance of like some type of life outside of work. So you can't, you can't overdo it in that area.
Valerie, what are your thoughts about that? What's going through your head as you listen to this?
Well, I'm definitely thinking about the cutting expenses. That for sure is always a challenge, especially living in New York. It's like, I want to have fun and I want to have this specific lifestyle, but I also have to sort of compromise, which is never fun, and be more disciplined.
Right.
I'm still like, what are the other options? Like, I don't want to feel like I'm taking shortcuts, but I want to exhaust all options.
There's so many opportunities out there. It's harder the older you get. I will say that, because when you're fresh out, oh my God, Beyonce Foundation got money for you. McDonald's got money for you. Old Navy got money for you. Everyone's throwing money at you through, grants for young professionals. But once you are now, in your older 30s, in your 40s, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, you don't have your money together? That's not cute. You're messy.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, so, but what's going on? I was like, you want to help me 10 years ago, help me now. So I definitely feel you on that. I think you should absolutely dedicate some time on the calendar to look for opportunities, for sure. Okay. There's nonprofits, there's organizations that are constantly looking to award money to help, especially depending on your identity markers. Like, if you're a young woman, if you're a woman of color, if you're low income, if you do nonprofit work, like a lot of those things can specifically be keywords to find grant opportunities. Okay. And, and then I would say too, like, because you are so frustrated by the interest, when you were talking about that, you're like, I hate when I look at them taking the interest money. There's little hacks and things. One thing that I will say you're already doing, you signed up for automatic payments from your checking account. That is amazing, because what it does is it lowers the interest rate that you have. So if your interest rate was, let's say, 6%, and then you set up automatic payments out of your checking account, you're now going to have a 5.75% interest. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking about potentially hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over the 20-year, 30 years of people paying off their student loans. So good on you, because you already did that. I would also say, look at your loans. Do you have multiple different federal student loans, or is it just like consolidated into one loan?
So I had two and I consolidated them. So now it's just the one loan.
And the reason why you would consolidate your loans is, of course, to get a better interest rate, which begs the question, what is a good interest rate?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I would say if you look at what the Federal Reserve is doing, and I know we're talking about the Federal Reserve, what are you talking about? Nobody wants to pay attention to the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is the big kahuna bank right now. So what you want to do is go look at the Federal Reserve, and you can just Google like Federal Reserve rate, and you'll be able to see what the Fed funds rate is. And right now, as we're having this conversation in early 2025, it's about 4.5%. So that means that when banks are dealing with each other, like let's say somebody comes to the bank, they're trying to take out money and the bank doesn't have it right now, they're going to have to borrow it from another bank real quick to keep the system working. And so they borrow from each other at this rate, at a lower rate than this. So in order to make profit, they kind of have to go a little bit above the Fed funds rate to like make things work for them financially. So if you look at the Fed funds rate, that's going to give you a good indicator of like a couple points above that is like, okay, we're close to the federal funds rate. The further away from that you get, the worse it's going to be. And the lower it is, the better. But I would always look at the federal funds rate as a baseline for where things are, because if the federal funds rate is really low, like 2 or 3%, well, then everything's going to generally be lower. So when I say something like, 7% is okay, that's relative to the federal funds rate. If the federal funds rate is 2%, 7% is way high. But if the federal funds rate is 4.5%, we're in a high rate environment, then of course 7% is actually going to be a little closer to normal in that context.
Okay, so obviously the higher the interest rate, the sooner you should pay off that loan. But there are a few options to consider. First of all, can you consolidate or refinance your student loan to get a more competitive rate? And second, sometimes people do think about paying off student loans with a low-interest credit card. You've probably seen these offers in the mail. There's 0% interest for 18 months or something like that. But the thing is, with those, you need to be very, very careful. If a credit card company is offering you anything, it's because they know it's going to make them money. So unless you are 1,000% positive that you can handle the transfer fees and pay off the balance of the credit card before the low interest rate period is up, that's probably not the best move. So what other options are out there for you?
When I first started thinking about paying off my loans, I was like, well, maybe I should withdraw money from my retirement savings and just pay that off in full. The interest will be lower on paying that like retirement funding back. I don't know what the penalty would be, but at the time I was like, is that an option?
Yeah. Actually, I know a lot of people who did this. It breaks my heart just a little bit because of the way these things work. So retirement accounts are like a really strong turtle shell. Like they just really protect you in a nice way, making sure that your retirement money is there for you, because that was the whole purpose of it, was retirement. If you borrow the money out of your retirement account now to pay for your debt, you're going to feel so much better. Your debt's going to be gone. And then you'll just repay back that retirement account money. But the money you put into the retirement account was pre-taxed. And the money that you're going to use to pay back the loan is going to be after-tax money. So, and then when you go to take it out at retirement, it's going to be taxed again because it's been sitting in a tax advantage retirement account, but the little asterisk was you took it out and put it back in. So now you're kind of going into this place where you're being okay with being taxed doubly. And the one thing that's worse than paying 6, 7, 8, 9%, 20% interest is paying 20% taxes twice. So I would always tell people not to do this, because looking at the fine print to me just never really makes it worth it, unless it's a very dire situation. But in your case, with the amount of money that you owe and the timeline that you're looking at, which is, on the shorter term, I think there's little hacks you can do that you shouldn't necessarily interrupt your retirement account. Okay. So I would say look beyond the 29 months of like annoying debt repayment, trudging through these monthly payments, and think bigger. Your retirement account is there for way longer than this next 29-month stretch of debt repayment for you.
Okay.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about small hacks that can save you thousands and some larger social changes that could upend the way we think about debt altogether. Stay with us.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
This episode is brought to you by Bank of America. What if your business could see beyond what is and into what can be? And what if you had a partner as visionary as you are? Bank of America gives customers access to trusted experts, real-time insights, and digital tools to make every move matter. What would you like the power to do? Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business. Bank of America is proud to be the official bank sponsor of FIFA World Cup 2026.
Before we get back to today's conversation, did you know that How To has bonus episodes? Every other week, you'll hear extended interviews, recommendations from Courtney and me, and we even have a special project going. It's one of my favorites. It's one of our producers, Rosie, who is finding the best advice from the How To archive and putting it to the test. Joining Slate means that you get all of that bonus content and you get to listen to all of Slate podcasts ad-free. So check that out and sign up for Slate Plus. You can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the How To show page, or visit slate.com/How To Plus to get access wherever you listen. More now with Valerie and our financial educator, Yanely Espinal. Just to get back to Valerie's original question, which is, Valerie's trying to avoid having to pay this off every month for 29 months and thusly paying an exorbitant amount of extra money on top of whatever the service was that she's paying for. But at the same time, unless she's able to somehow cut expenses in her life to an extreme degree, are there any other choices that she has? Or is her best option to just knuckle up, put the automatic payments in place, and just grind it out for 29 months?
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on your situation in terms of your credit score. If you have excellent credit, if you have 800, 750 plus credit, it's going to be super easy for you to secure really low interest rate loans. So there is a world where, in theory, if your credit is excellent, you can go ahead and get a super low interest rate loan, and then you can pay off that higher rate debt to your student loans and be completely done with that. And then you just focus on that much lower interest rate loan that you took out with your excellent credit. In your case, it would really depend on what your credit looks like. Even if it feels like you're in a better situation and moving forward, it's going to help you out, all of those past payments that you defaulted, all of that is still on your credit report. So 5-6 years later, it might still be haunting you. It might take 10 years before a lot of that stuff, those delinquencies and a lot of those defaults and late payments, are actually completely gone from your credit and not hurting you or holding you back. So I would say just think about your credit situation. And before jumping to that, I would say just do every little hack, every little tip and trick that you can do. So for example, one thing I would recommend is when you make your payment, Valerie, do you pay your $500 on the same day every single month as your auto pay?
No. So the auto pay is $300, and then I get paid twice a month. So the auto pay will cover the first payment, and then when I get paid the second time, then I'll pay an additional $200.
Okay, so two things that I want to talk about there. One is the way interest is calculated on your debt is daily accrual. So the earlier in the month that you can send the fattest chunk payment, the better. Even if that means that you use your credit card to pay for your groceries and your cell phone bill, and then you pay your groceries and your cell phone bill with your last check of the month, so you don't carry any debt on it, that is good if it means that you get to front load a payment to your student loan at the very beginning of the month, because your daily interest is calculated based on the principal amount, based on the loan amount each day. So if your amount today is $13,000 and you make a $500 payment, tomorrow the interest is going to be calculated on $12,500. The more you can pay earlier, the lower in interest you will actually end up paying, which could potentially cut a month or two off of your timeline. So you could be getting out of debt in 26 months instead of 29 months simply because you shifted your payments earlier in the month. The second thing I want to say is when you make those extra payments, when you get those next few checks, are you calling them to make sure that those payments are actually hitting the principal and not interest?
No, I don't.
Oh, say more about that. Yeah, this is news to me. Go on.
Yes. So your minimum that you have to pay is usually going to include part of it going towards interest and the other part going towards principal. Now, if you are trying to make as much money off of people as you can, which one would you put more money to, the principal or the interest?
The interest for sure.
You're trying to keep that principal as fat as possible because the interest for all future payments is calculated based upon the principal. They don't want that principal to go down. So if you send extra money this month, let's say you send an extra $100, they're going to be real slick and they're just going to subtract that 100 from the interest, because then next month your interest is going to hit right again on the principal balance, the original, and still hasn't changed. So if you've made your minimum payment already, let's say by the 5th or 6th of the month, your minimum is fully met. You've done exactly what you're required to do in terms of your interest payment requirement, which is a small portion of that minimum that you already paid. Now you send an extra 100, you need to call them and you need to make sure that that extra 100 was all put towards the principal. So if they're not doing that, you could have been giving them all these extra payments and it's not doing anything to that principal balance because they keep putting it towards interest. So you have to really make sure extra payments beyond your minimum have to go towards principal, and you have to confirm that each time you make a payment.
Wow. I did not know that was even an option.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Wow.
That's good to know.
If you go through and look at your account and you start adding up all the payments that you made, you're like, wait a minute, how come this is all like not putting a dent in it? It's just subtracting from the interest you accrued and not from your principal. You should be putting a dent in your principal every time you send extra money.
Okay. Looks like I have some phone calls to make. I have another question. I know that, the specter of student loan forgiveness kind of like captured everyone's imagination a couple of years ago when, people have wanted it for a long time. People have made arguments for it for a long time. You heard it kind of bandied about at political levels. I assume we sort of know the answer to this with this current administration, but just from your perspective, Yanely, do you think that student loan forgiveness is a thing that someone should hold out for if they're holding big debt and they're contemplating whether or not to sacrifice other aspects of their lives in order to address this debt? Should they pause a little bit and see how things develop in terms of kind of universal forgiveness?
I would say for universal forgiveness, absolutely not. In my view, it is not going to happen. However, if we're talking about specific types of service loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness program, which, can be capped at $5,000 or $10,000, but hey, that still helps. Then yes, you should do everything in your power to get those programs that you're entitled to get and that you see it deducted from your account.
Basically, for the past decade, I've worked at nonprofits. I applied for public service loan forgiveness, and I got this letter last week. My application has been received, but in the letter it says that my loan is still in default. And so they're like, okay, call this number. I called the number this morning, and it's some automated system. And it's like, well, your loan isn't in default anymore, so you need to contact your payment provider. And so over the course of me really kind of diving into this process with the Department of Education, I keep running into these it's always this automated system. It's never a clear answer.
Yeah.
This letter they sent me was wrong.
Oh my goodness, I went through this with my sister. So first thing you have to do is make sure you actually qualify for the program, which means that you actually have the experience. It sounds like you do because you worked in a nonprofit, but the second piece of qualifying is actually how many payments. So you must have made 120 qualifying payments, which is if you make a payment every month, that's 12 payments a year. So we're talking about 10 years of making, and this is the caveat here, 10 years of making full payments. Because my sister, in one case, when I worked with my sister, she was making partial payments, and we found out partial payments don't count.
That's good to know.
They have to be, and so it's gonna take a little bit of pull up your PDFs, pull up all the account stuff, and start actually looking for the data. Can you prove that you have 120 full payments and that all of those payments were made on time within 15 days of the due date? So on time, that's a technicality there. If you paid it 2 days after the due date, that still counts as on time. It just has to be within 15 days of your due date. And then if you go sit down and you check off all of that, then you should 100% submit that application. And Valerie, in your case, you already got a letter saying, hey, they received your application. Now what you want to do is be calling, be emailing, be contacting as much as possible to let them know that while the receiving of your application is great, that there's a discrepancy that they need to resolve, which is that you are no longer in default, and yet it's telling you that you are. So, and you want to verify that with all three credit bureaus. You got to put on your private investigator hat and be with your magnifying glass, let me make sure I got all these details, crossing my T's, dotting my I's. They can't come at me because I'm verifying everything.
I find the language on the FAFSA website to be a little just missing details, I guess. Are there any other websites, like resource websites, that you can recommend that could really break down, like, this is the process, this is the, like, these are the sites you need to go on, or like just definitions of the different types of forgiveness, or like, you know, I did not know that, you know, I was like, okay, I'm going to apply for this loan forgiveness and I'm going to make 120 like $7 payments or something.
Oh,
you know?
No, that won't count. It won't count, sis. You know what? I will say it's really hard to recommend another site because it's like you have to go to the primary source. Like if I'm going to tell you to go somewhere, it's going to be go to studentaid.gov because it's like when I tell you when you're filing taxes and you have a question, you go to irs.gov. You don't go to some random website that somebody posted up there saying the IRS doesn't require you to do this, because you need to verify with irs.gov if you're required to do it or not. The one thing I will tell you I've done, and I have told my sister to do this and others, is to follow people who are really passionate about this and who do teach this. You know, like I have a good friend, Nika Booth. She has a platform called Debt Free Gonna Be, and she's pretty much calls herself a debt freedom coach, and she has helped so many. I mean, I think $2 or $3 million in student loan cancellation through her education around the PSLF process and just helping everybody understand. So when you find people like her who are just truly passionate about educating and breaking down everything in the news, and like you can even send her a link to the page and be like, sis, make content about this page. What does this mean? You know, because that's the passion that they have for the topic. But I would, again, always, when you're doing your own research, go to the primary source. And unfortunately, in this case, it's studentaid.gov.
You know, a lot of people have a question about, is it more important for me to put, if I have like, say, $200 at the end of the month, that is, you know, is it more important that I put that money into like extra student loan payments, or I put that money into retirement? Well, how does one decide what is the best place to put that money?
Yeah. So, and this is such a great question. So what I would do is like actually look at like the next 3 to 5 years of your life. If you feel like the student loan burden is going to be following you for potentially a decade or close to a decade of your life, in that case, it can get in the way of you trying to accelerate retirement contributions, because when you're growing money in the market, they give you the averages for a decade. They usually say like the average, the market goes up 10%. Yeah, but that's every 10 years, right? Yeah, so if I can accelerate getting out of debt this like less than this next decade, and then take that same amount of money and pretend I still have debt, except put it towards my retirement, there's a world where I can kind of be really aggressive with retirement. But the problem is, when you go to retire, there is no such thing as a retirement loan, right? Like there are student loans. So unfortunately, even though they're annoying and they can pester and they can follow you for decades, the worst thing you can do is like focus so much on debt pay down. You feel really good. And now you're 55 and you have like $2 in your retirement account, and you're starting to stress out because retirement usually starts around 65. So you're 10 years away, and now you're like, oh my goodness, I can see it's coming up on the horizon and I ain't prepared. Now that's going to add another layer of stress when you're supposed to be like jubilant that you just paid off these student loans. So I would say it's probably better to sprinkle the wealth a little bit. If you have an extra $500, maybe split that and put half towards your student loan, half towards your retirement, because the retirement account could grow significantly with market gains. It could also just be the same rate of growth that you're paying in interest on your loan, which kind of brings you to like you even out, right? Which is annoying. But the point is, we don't know. So the best thing you can do is put yourself in a situation where you really diversify. Like you try to put yourself in the best situation, not knowing what the future outcome would be. So if you have a relatively low interest rate debt, which would be something, you know, close to like the Fed funds rate, so anything around 4, 5, 6, 7% right now, that sounds high, but it's actually pretty low, versus if you have a credit card at 27%, that's very high. So I would prioritize those very differently. I would definitely get rid of the 27% interest debt as quickly as I can, so I can redirect that money to retirement. But if I have a 6%, 5% student loan, I would probably split any extra money I have between my retirement and my student loans, because at the end of the day, the interest on that loan isn't really high, and the potential gains you can get from your retirement account, which is invested in the market, are going to be potentially much more significant than that 6%.
Wow. That's very helpful. And I appreciate you breaking it down. I've asked that question to so many people, and that might be the clearest answer I've ever heard and the clearest explanation. So like, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
You know, I want to circle back to kind of like just overall financial literacy. Like you, Yanely, I did not learn this. I think we all have this in common, not only because it's not taught in school. I also didn't have adults in my life who knew anything about money other than just like, you get a paycheck, you spend a paycheck,
right?
You're broke until the next paycheck comes, and then then you go eat. Like, that's pretty much how I grew up, you know?
Yep.
And so we're often told that the best way to stay out of debt is to avoid it altogether. Okay, but that closes the door on a lot of opportunities for young people, since a lot of things, going to college, starting businesses, does require taking on debt.
Yes.
You know, what should high schoolers or young people know in order to make smarter calculations from the get-go?
I would say that statements or that piece of advice is incomplete. When somebody says, don't take on debt, I would say add comma, unless you also have a debt repayment plan in place when you take on the debt. Like, not after you take on debt, like before you actually sign off on it. If you saw that $25,000 looked like $1,000 a month for 10 years, would that change how you approach that $25K, right? If you broke it down into $250 every Friday for the next 10 years, like if you talked about it in those ways that are actually tangible and realistic to envision, $25,000, a 17-year-old can't envision that. It's like more money than most people have in the bank. Like, that's not realistic. But if you say you're going to have to send every Friday $250, every Friday, you have to send it. Now that changes things. It puts it within my frame of reference. And it makes it something that I can actually envision myself either hating or being able to do. So that way, now I sign on for the debt, knowing what I have committed to every Friday, $250. Because any debt that you have should be coupled with a debt repayment plan for that debt.
Breaking up the systems that perpetuate generational cycles of poverty takes financial literacy and mentorship, just like Yanely was talking about. But we should also be working within our families and together with our communities.
I come from a very big family. So my parents have 9 children.
Wow.
And I'm one of them. So clearly it's like I'm in the mix, right? Growing up in that household, we share everything. The girls, we shared hairbrushes. The boys, they shared sneakers. The girls, we slept on bunk beds. Like, we share a bed. Like, we're going to share everything because there's too many of us here. We don't have that kind of money for everyone to get their own hairbrush or whatever the thing is. And yet when it comes to money, we do the total opposite. Every person has their own bank account. Every person has their own debit card, their own credit card, and we don't talk and we don't share finances and we don't meet to discuss these things. It's so bizarre because we come from a very collectivist culture and a collectivist community family dynamic, but yet with money, it's the opposite. So what I did was, in 2019, I actually sat my family down and we basically made a family savings plan. And every single month, all 8 of my siblings, myself included, all 9 of us, whatever you can give. Like, I don't care if you give $300, I don't care if you give $30. Well, I'm not here to judge. We're not here to look at each other's contributions. None of that. It all comes via Zelle or whatever they say, Venmo, however they want to send it. It comes straight into a family high yield savings account that I created. I put my sister, myself, and my brother on it. So there's multiple people who can access the accounts to make sure nothing shady's going on. And the money just all goes in there. And anytime my parents don't have enough to buy groceries, or they're short for the mortgage, or my dad wants to take a trip to visit his sick brother in Dominican Republic, we don't have to stress. We don't have to be like, who got it? Who's going to cover? We've been saving for years, little by little, 20, 30 a month. It really adds up. So, I encourage you to talk to your family about doing something like that, something communal, so that you don't have to wake up every day feeling that stress of like, oh, I don't have the money. And this debt is like, I'm trying to handle all the things. Like, no. You guys can do it together.
I can't think of any time when we ever talked about money. Like, maybe we had little conversations about, you should save this or you should do that. But like, I find that when I am around my non-POC counterparts or whatever, like, there's definitely this ongoing conversation that kind of continues into adulthood about finances that I just did not get. And even now when I talk to my mom, there's some level of like secrecy that I'm just like, we can't keep going like this. And so
it takes those conversations too. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna be like delusional and sit here and tell you that you're just gonna explain to your mom like one time and then she's magically gonna transform into somebody who's like very open to talk about this stuff. Like, it's going to be like tiny little inputs, tiny inputs over a long time. But when you were talking about how your dad, like when the mail came and you had a letter from your student repayment terms and your dad was like, well, Valerie, here's your mail. That's your thing, girl. Like, it's funny when you said that, I immediately had like a vivid picture of the same thing happening in my household. Like the bills would come and my dad would be like, well, here's your cell phone bill, here's your this. And it would be like no communal responsibility. But think about how powerful or like empowering, at least for me, to think about, Valerie, maybe potentially your future generations, my future generations, where we'll be the change agents. We'll be the ones that will be like, baby, we're going to sit down at this table and go through everything so you can understand. I'm going to explain it to you, and you're not going to get these papers. I'm going to hand them to you and go in the room and watch my TV. We're going to do this together. And that's such a beautiful thing. Just because you and I didn't get it doesn't mean we can't give it.
Yeah.
That is really beautiful. And I relate to that. And I just think when I look at my parents' generation, they came from like abject poverty. Like my mom's side, especially, she was the youngest of 19 children. And I mean, they came from like dirt, and so they really got it out of the mud. And so my mother never really made a lot of money, but her siblings like got, middle class, government jobs, DC, living in the suburbs, PG County, like they sort of made their way. Yeah. But I think a lot of the reasons they could never talk about it is because they had to do everything on their own. Yeah. They had to figure it out on their own. Yeah. And I think they deeply believed and held the belief that that's how you have to do it right. No one can do it for you. You have to just go out there and figure it out. And because that's what they had to do, And so, I mean, Yanely, I love what you're saying, that like, that's not necessarily the way it has to be. Like, we can share this stuff with our kids so that they don't have to learn through the bumps and bruises that we had to learn through.
That's right. I even have a friend named Jaime. He's based out in SF area. He works with students in the college track program. He has a few sisters, and all of his sisters plus him, they all had student loan debt. And what they did was they sat down together. They pooled all of the amounts of loan debt that they owed and did the interest rates on all of them. They took the average interest rate and the payments, and they pooled together all the extra money that they could come up with each month. And they made a community student loan pot. So they paid off their student loans together. And like, I just see those images and hear those stories, and I'm like, why don't more people know that that's an option? Why don't we talk about that more? Why don't we celebrate that? Why isn't there more visibility for that? Because I do think that especially communities of color have such a collectivist culture dynamic that we would thrive when we hear that that's a possibility.
Yeah. I love that. I would love to sit and talk with the two of you forever because I love this conversation so much. But I just want to know, Valerie, was this helpful to you?
Yeah, it was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for giving me the time and space to talk about this situation, and the resources you've provided are very, very helpful. So thank you again.
I love it. I'm so happy, and I'm so grateful that you came and were so open with us and just shared your story with us. And Yanely, do you have any last advice or any last words of encouragement for those listeners who are hanging on?
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening in, you're already taking a step in the right direction. There's so many people out there who just like stick their head in the sand. They don't listen to podcasts like this. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to pretend that if they don't acknowledge it, it will go away. And it won't. It's just going to be like a dark cloud, and it's only going to get bigger and darker and grayer. And so I commend you for listening and tuning into this. And I just hope that there's maybe 1 or 2 action steps that you can take from this that you can jot down and like commit to doing, because that's the biggest thing is after listening to something like this, you feel great. You're like, oh, wow, yeah, there's hope. But the action after is the most important thing.
If you want more of Yanely's incredible advice, please be sure to check out her book, Mind Your Money, or listen to the podcast she hosts for Marketplace. It's called Financially Inclined. Do you have a problem that needs solving? If so, send us a note at howto@slate.com or leave us a voicemail at 646-495-4001, and we might have you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, please give us a rating and a review, and share this episode right now with someone you know who is facing debt, because that helps us help more people. Slate has a lot of great shows, by the way. I recommend checking out last week's Outward podcast. My colleague Christina Cauterucci spoke with Garrett Morgan, a trans lieutenant commander in the Navy, about the Trump administration's ban on transgender people serving in the military. Listen to it at slate.com/outward, or just search for Outward in your favorite podcast app. How To is produced by Rosie Belson and Kevin Bendis. Joel Meyer is senior editor, and Derek John is executive producer. Mara Jacob is senior technical director and composed our theme music. Charles Duhigg created the show. Courtney Martin is my co-host, and I'm Carvell Wallace. Thanks for listening.